Plato never believed in a God who listens to prayers. And that already puts him closer to modern philosophy than most people realize. In fact, if you think Plato's divine principle is anything like the God of Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, you've fundamentally misunderstood him. And so has most of Western theology. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Plato rejected a personal God, and how his idea of the divine shaped Western philosophy for 2,000 years. You'll see why the form of the good is not a being you can pray to, worship, or have a relationship with. And you'll understand why confusing Plato's God with the biblical God creates a philosophical disaster that we're still trying to untangle today. This isn't about attacking religion. It's about understanding what Plato actually said before theology rewrote him.
Most people imagine Plato believed in a God who has consciousness, makes choices, intervenes in the world, cares about human affairs, judges actions, answers prayers. That picture doesn't come from Plato. It comes from theology projected backward. Here's what happened. Early Christian thinkers, especially Augustine, read Plato through a biblical lens. They saw the form of the good and thought, that must be God. They saw the Demiurge and thought, that must be the Creator. And for centuries, Western philosophy has been treating Plato as if he were doing proto-theology, as if he were building a philosophical foundation for belief in a personal God. But he wasn't. Plato wasn't trying to prove the God of Abraham. He was trying to explain why reality is intelligible at all. And the answer he gave is so radically different from theism that most people can't even see it. Because we've been trained to read divine and immediately think personal. We assume that if something is ultimate, it must be conscious. If something is good, it must care. If something is foundational, it must choose. But Plato rejected all of that. And until you understand why, you can't understand Plato at all.
Plato lived in Athens in the 4th century BC. He was a student of Socrates, the philosopher who was executed for questioning the gods of the city. That event shaped Plato profoundly. He saw what happens when philosophy challenges religious authority. But he also saw that the traditional gods of Athens, Zeus, Athena, Apollo, were myths, stories with moral lessons, maybe, but not explanations of reality. Plato wanted something deeper. He wanted to understand why the world is ordered, why mathematics works, why we can know anything at all. He wasn't asking, how should we worship the gods? He was asking, what makes reality intelligible? And that's a completely different question. Philosophy, for Plato, wasn't about devotion. It was about understanding the structure of being itself. The Republic, the Symposium, the Phaedo, the Timaeus. These aren't religious texts. They're investigations into the nature of knowledge, beauty, justice, and existence. And at the center of Plato's system is something he calls the form of the good. Not God, the good, and the difference matters. Because Plato wasn't asking how to worship God. He was asking how reality is intelligible.
Before we go further, we need to define something clearly. What do we mean by a personal God? A personal God is a being with will, the capacity to choose between options, emotion, love, anger, mercy, jealousy, intention, purposes directed towards specific outcomes, relationship, the ability to interact with individual beings, response, listening, answering, intervening. This is the God of the Abrahamic traditions. The God who created the world and said, "It is good." The God who spoke to Moses from the burning bush. The God who sent prophets, performed miracles, answered prayers, a God who knows you, who cares about you, who can be pleased or disappointed. That's what we mean by personal. Now here's the key distinction. A personal God acts. Plato's divine principle doesn't. It doesn't think. It doesn't decide. It doesn't respond. It doesn't even exist in the way a person exists. The form of the good is not a being among other beings. It's the condition that makes being intelligible. And if that sounds abstract and impersonal, that's because it is. Plato's God, if you even want to call it that, has no personality, no agency, no relationship with you. It's closer to a mathematical principle than a divine father. And that changes everything.
So what is the form of the good? In Plato's Republic, Socrates describes it as the highest of all forms, the source of truth and knowledge, the principle that makes everything else intelligible. But here's the critical point. The good is not a thing. It's not an entity. It's not a mind or a consciousness. It's a principle of order. Think of it like this. In mathematics, the number 2 doesn't decide to be even. It doesn't choose its properties. It simply is what it is, necessarily, eternally, unchangeably. The form of the good works the same way. It doesn't choose to make things good. It doesn't will the structure of reality. It simply is the standard by which all things are measured. Plato uses the analogy of the sun. The sun makes things visible, but it doesn't decide what you see. It doesn't care whether you look at a tree or a stone. It just illuminates. The form of the good works the same way for the mind. It makes truth knowable. It makes reality intelligible. But it doesn't think about you. It doesn't love you. It doesn't respond to your prayers or your struggles. Here's the phrase that captures it perfectly. The good doesn't love you. It makes love intelligible. It's the principle by which love can be understood, recognized, valued. But the good itself has no emotions, no intentions, no will. And this is where most people lose the thread. Because we're so used to thinking of the ultimate as personal, as caring, as involved. But for Plato, the ultimate is impersonal by nature. It's the unchanging foundation that makes change possible, the eternal structure that makes temporal existence coherent, not a being you relate to, but a principle you contemplate. And if you grasp that principle, if you align your soul with the form of the good, you achieve wisdom, virtue, and inner harmony. Not because God rewards you, but because you've understood the structure of reality itself. That's Plato's vision, and it's nothing like theism.
This is where most readers quietly stop understanding Plato. Because everything in our cultural background tells us that ultimate reality must be personal. That if something is divine, it must care. That if something is foundational, it must have a will. But Plato rejects that entirely. And the moment you try to force his philosophy into a theistic framework, you destroy what makes it coherent. So here's the question nobody asks. If Plato's divine principle isn't personal, does that make him an atheist? Or is he doing something completely different? No, Plato is not an atheist. But he's also not a theist in any conventional sense. Here's the distinction. Atheism denies the existence of the divine. Plato doesn't deny it. He redefines it. For Plato, divine doesn't mean personal. It means eternal, unchanging, and foundational. The form of the good is divine, not because it loves or judges or intervenes, but because it is the ultimate source of order and intelligibility. It's what makes knowledge possible, what makes reality coherent. What makes virtue meaningful? That's divinity for Plato, not a who, a what. An ontological principle, not a psychological agent. And this is crucial. Calling the form of the good God is already misleading, because the word God carries baggage. It implies personality, intention, relationship. But Plato's good has none of that. You can't pray to a principle. You can't worship an abstraction. You can only understand it. And once you understand it, you realize that the question, does God exist, is the wrong question. For Plato, the real question is, what grounds existence itself? And the answer is an impersonal, eternal, necessary structure, not a being who chooses, but a principle that simply is. So Plato isn't rejecting the divine, he's stripping it of personality, and that makes him more radical than most atheists. Because atheists still think in theistic categories, they just answer no. Plato changes the question entirely.
And anything that acts, chooses, or creates is already one step removed from the ultimate. Now, here's where things get complicated. Because Plato does talk about a creator figure, the Demiurge. In the Timaeus, the Demiurge is described as a craftsman who shapes the material world. And this is where people get confused. They read craftsman and think God the creator. They assume the Demiurge is Plato's version of the biblical God. But that's completely wrong. Here's the critical difference. The Demiurge does not create ex nihilo, out of nothing. He doesn't speak the world into existence. He doesn't have absolute power or freedom. The Demiurge is a craftsman, not a creator in the theological sense. He works with pre-existing materials. He organizes chaos into order, but he doesn't decide what order means. He follows a pattern, and that pattern is the form of the good. The Demiurge looks at the eternal forms, the perfect, unchanging archetypes, and tries to shape the material world to resemble them as closely as possible. But he's limited. By matter, by necessity, by the constraints of the physical world. He's doing the best he can with imperfect materials. Here's the key phrase. The Demiurge follows the good. He is not the good, he's subordinate to it. He doesn't create the standards of truth, beauty, and order. He applies them. And he's not an object of worship. Plato never suggests you should pray to the Demiurge, or offer sacrifices, or build temples. The Demiurge is a philosophical explanation, not a religious figure. He answers the question, how did the material world come to have order? But he doesn't answer, who should I worship? So when early Christian theologians read the Timaeus and saw the Demiurge, they made a catastrophic mistake. They conflated the Demiurge with the biblical creator, and they conflated the form of the good with God the Father. But Plato kept them separate for a reason, because for him, the ultimate reality, the good, is beyond personality, beyond action, beyond relationship.
So let's sit with the weight of this for a moment. If Plato is right, then the ultimate reality, the divine principle at the foundation of everything, doesn't care about you. It doesn't know your name. It doesn't hear your prayers. It doesn't intervene in your suffering. It doesn't reward virtue or punish vice. It simply is. The order of the cosmos doesn't revolve around human beings. We're not the center of the story. We're participants in a structure that exists independently of us. And here's the radical ethical consequence. Virtue for Plato doesn't come from obeying commandments. It doesn't come from divine revelation. It doesn't come from fear of punishment or hope of reward. Virtue comes from understanding, from aligning your soul with the form of the good, from grasping the rational structure of reality, and living accordingly. Plato doesn't ask you to obey God. He asks you to understand reality. And once you understand it, virtue follows naturally. Not because you're commanded, but because you've seen what's true. This is philosophy as a way of life, not religion, not faith, but rational contemplation leading to transformation. And it's deeply uncomfortable for anyone raised in a theistic tradition, because it removes the personal relationship, the comfort of being known, the hope of divine intervention. Plato offers clarity instead, order instead of love, truth instead of grace. And for him, that's enough, because the goal isn't to be saved, it's to understand.
So what happened to Plato's vision? It became one of the most influential and most distorted ideas in Western thought. The Neoplatonists, philosophers like Plotinus in the 3rd century, took Plato's impersonal good and mystified it. They turned contemplation into spiritual ascent. They made the one, their version of the good, into something you could unite with, not through relationship, but through transcendence of the self, still impersonal, but now with a quasi-religious flavor. Then came the Christian theologians. Augustine read Plato and saw God. He took the form of the good and identified it with the God of the Bible, eternal, unchanging, the source of all truth. It seemed to fit. But Augustine had to add something Plato never said. Personality, will love, because the Christian God isn't just a principle. He's a person who creates, loves, judges, and redeems. And that created a tension that has never been resolved. How do you reconcile the impersonal God of philosophy with the personal God of Scripture? Medieval theologians tried. Aquinas tried. They wanted both, the rational certainty of Plato and the relational intimacy of Christianity. But it's a philosophical compromise, and Plato never made it. Then there's Aristotle, Plato's student. Aristotle saw the problems with Plato's system and tried to fix them. He replaced the form of the good with the unmoved mover, a divine principle that thinks, that knows, but still doesn't care about you. And that created a whole new set of problems. Here's the truth. Plato didn't give Western philosophy a god to worship. He gave it a problem to solve. A problem we're still wrestling with today. Can the ultimate reality be impersonal? Or does meaning require relationship? Can we build ethics on reason alone? Or do we need love, grace, and purpose from something beyond ourselves? Plato answered one way. Christianity answered another. And philosophy has been trying to reconcile them ever since.
So here's the uncomfortable question. If Plato is right, if the ultimate reality is an impersonal principle, not a personal being, then what does that mean for religion? It means a personal God is already a philosophical compromise, a step down from the ultimate. Something more accessible maybe, more comforting, but not foundational. And the next question becomes unavoidable. Can you have meaning without personality? Can you have purpose without intention? Can you have love without a lover at the foundation of everything? Plato said yes. Christianity said no. And modern philosophy is still caught between them. We want the rational clarity of Plato, the certainty that comes from understanding eternal principles. But we also want the warmth of relationship, the comfort of being known, the hope that the universe cares. Maybe we can't have both. Maybe the choice Plato forced on us is still the choice we face today. Impersonal truth or personal meaning? Which one can you live without?
In the next video, we'll see how Aristotle tried to fix Plato and created a God who knows everything except you, a God who thinks eternally, who is pure actuality, who moves the entire cosmos, but who has no awareness of your existence, no knowledge of your struggles, no concern for your prayers. Aristotle wanted to make the divine more concrete than Plato's abstract good, but in doing so, he created something even stranger. A God who is utterly perfect and utterly indifferent. If you want to understand why medieval theology struggled so hard to reconcile philosophy with faith, you need to see what Aristotle did and why it made the problem worse. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Can an impersonal principle be divine? Or does the word God require personality? See you in the next one.